if we should do lunch before the debate, but hopefully we can try and do that before. Since we've had a lot of time on this already and there's questions come. Kia ora, Councillor Sayers. Councillor Fuller, you have a question.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. First, I just want to commend the team for the huge work, huge mahi that's gone into this. I know that we've had lots and lots of workshops, and this in its current form is very different to what we saw at the start. And I commend you for listening to all of the feedback and making changes, track changes that we can see, and all the work that's gone into that. I guess I just wanted you to clarify so that the people in the public as well can hear. Because the FDS is a 30-year spatial plan to provide and inform us in our decision making for sufficient housing and business dwellings for capacity for the next 30 years, can you just repeat, under this FDS, what is the number of dwellings that it allows?
Councillor Foley, I'm just furiously finding notes.
That's okay. And then my follow-up question would have been whether or not, in your opinion, that capacity that it allows would be exhausted. What's the probability of that being exhausted in the next 30 years?
Councillor Foley, so in terms of the numbers, this gets rather complicated. The NPS is very clear on the different kinds of capacity that you need to look at. And so giving all of that, I'm not going to explain any of that. But if we get to the end point, in terms of what the plan-enabled capacity with infrastructure expected to be delivered, whether it's feasible, plus then a margin that you have to apply. When we do all of that and get to the end point, we also look at this in terms of short, medium, and long term. So the first thing to look at is the demand. And so that is that is based on the population projections, the household formation that comes from that population, etc., etc. And so if we look at the demand, in the short term, we're talking around 23,000 new dwellings. In the medium term, around 85,000 new dwellings. And in the long term, 226,000 dwellings. So say over the 30 years, in terms of the projections, what we would need is an additional 226,000 dwellings. So then we look at the supply side, the capacity. And as I say, if we go right to the end point, meeting all of the requirements, in the short term, at this stage, we have 271,000 capacity. In the medium term, 782,000, and in the long term, just over 1.2 million. So that's the capacity. So in that sense, we have more than sufficient capacity and unlikely to run out of capacity over the 30 years. However, and because there's always a however, nothing is static, things change. And so one must not necessarily look at the sufficient capacity as an absolute. Things keep on changing. And so I think it is worthwhile thinking about what is the best thing to do, because we also think about affordability and therefore the competition in the market, which is a key thing that the NPS aims at, is to create sufficient competition within the market, which then has a flow-on effect to affordability. To say how much exactly that is, that's impossible. Nobody knows that. But that is a principle, and that there's a logic behind that. So what the FDS also says is, even though we do have sufficient capacity applying the criteria, it is also a good thing to create additional capacity in good locations, as I defined what those kind of are. And that doesn't have to be created tomorrow, but over time, we need to continue to create capacity in those good locations where people do want to live. And that doesn't mean just brownfield. There are also good greenfield locations where there's PT and all of that, train stations, etc., that we need to continue to create that capacity where people actually want to live and where the market can deliver that kind of stuff. So even though we meet the requirements, we have sufficient capacity, short, medium, long term, we also say we should continue to create additional capacity in those good locations. And that really is to create more competition in the market that then hopefully has an effect on affordability.
Kia ora. Thank you for that very fulsome answer. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora. Councillor Ferry.
Thank you, and repeating the thanks very much for the very comprehensive work on this. I wanted to go back a little bit to the conversation we were having, Jacques, about the sort of cost to develop, sparked by Councillor Watson's questions, and sort of thinking about that that aspect of cost to developers. That in some cases we may be seeing that they may see brownfields as less profitable, but that doesn't mean that they're not profitable. Is that sort of a fair, like, you know, it might be cheaper and easier for them to build in greenfields, but they're still going to make money in the brownfields. Is that sort of a fair assessment? I mean, obviously it depends site by site, but as a general rule.
So I can't speak for a particular developer.
Yeah.
And their business model and what that looks for, I can only speak more generally. And that, so maybe 2 points. The one is the HPA. One aspect of what we need to do is the feasibility of development. That feasibility model that we used, we developed in, I think, I can't quite remember, maybe 2017. And that feasibility model was developed with developers, with the development sector. Together we developed how that model works, how you think about feasibility, so land cost plus material cost, etc., holding costs, all of that. So the feasibility model tells us that there is a significant number of development capacity that is feasible. So that's the one aspect. That model that was developed with developers who do development tells us that a lot of that is feasible. And I suppose the second point is just the logic that I apply. If 83%, thereabout, of development over the past number of years have been in brownfields, then clearly it is feasible because people can develop it and people buy it or rent it. So clearly something is feasible and clearly it is working. That doesn't mean that it keeps on working exactly the same year in, year out.
Yeah.
The market goes up and down, and that is the whole thing about feasibility. What is feasible today is not necessarily feasible tomorrow, but might be again next week.
Okay, and so sort of following on from that, I mean, obviously, you know, we have been talking a bit about cost to develop, but I guess that's standing in as a measure for cost to buy and affordability, which is not necessarily a straight relationship. I mean, I've been thinking about some of the influences on price, and particularly on resale over time. You know, issues around amenity, access to schools and transport and things like that, which are out of a developer's control, but actually are within our remit. In terms of, you know, often we own those land or provide those facilities. So did you have a comment on that sort of, you know, that cost to develop is not necessarily cost to buy? Thanks.
Yeah, the distinction I made is about the cost to develop, to the developer, but there, of course, is the broader cost. And often a lot of those costs over time then fall to the council. We have to provide additional community facilities. We have to maintain things. We have to provide PT services. So there's all of those additional costs. There's probably a third aspect to think about, and that is also the cost of living.
Yep.
In the sense of buying a property is one thing, being able to live in that property and all the other costs that come with it, whether that's your travel costs or insurance costs or whatever that is, that's a whole nother aspect. And so I think one needs to look at all of those and not just the cost to build and sell a dwelling. There's a societal cost, there's an individual cost, and one needs to think about all of that. And you can't just think about what it costs me to develop and sell this building.
And so, final question then is how the FDS reflects that consideration of broader cost, not just cost to develop. Is that a fair assessment?
To the extent that the FDS can, absolutely. It also therefore looks at development across the whole region, not just in particular places.
Yep.
And it there also looks at councils' ability to service the whole region. Plus it also thinks about the implications or the consequences of some of the development, like I say, the need to then provide services, OPEX costs. You know through the LTP the difficulties council is facing in terms of operational costs. And of course, the more you extend networks, the bigger those operational costs become. So the FDS thinks about all of those to the extent that it can. Of course, it's not the detailed financial document.
Thanks, Jacques.
Kia ora, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Kia ora, thank you very much. I mean, a lot of my points have been answered, and a lot of them through the sort of 6 workshops we had. But I've got a couple of quick questions. The feedback was really clear in a number of areas, and one of those was that funding should follow the growth. What are we actually going to do to implement that feedback? Because I'm aware that we're talking about planning processes, not necessarily financial ones, but how do we listen and take into account of that, that I think really important point?
Chair, that's probably more a question to the decision makers rather than me. But what the FDS does do, and it absolutely acknowledges the point that Councillor Henderson has just made, it makes that one of the priority areas. So in terms of our investments, it's got that category because yes, that investment has to happen, and it then as input to the LTP, it's one of those priority areas, and it says that the LTP really needs to fund that kind of investment that needs to go both to where growth already has happened and services and infrastructure is needed, and where growth will happen in the future as it happens.
Cool, thank you. I suspected as much, but thanks for the answer. The other sort of final question I have is that we're talking about this in a vacuum and getting into a lot of detail, but then private plan changes just come in and just essentially claim hegemony over our own planning framework and what we're elected to do. So is there absolutely nothing that we can do about that situation? Because it's so frustrating.
One of the things that the FDS does, it has a direction for the unitary plan to strengthen the considerations, the things that need to be considered when private plan changes comes in. Now that's clearly going to take a while to do that, but it tries to strengthen it at that level. The other thing it does is to introduce the principle of prerequisites, not the actual projects, but the principle of prerequisites at the RPS level in the unitary plan, so that again, that is something that at that level has to be taken into account when it comes to private plan changes. So it tries to strengthen it through the unitary plan in that way.
Cool, thank you. I appreciate your work. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
Sure. Just got a question around the risks first, and that's in the analysis. Why isn't there a risk identified for a change in government and the impact of that? Because quite clearly that is a risk, and we've known about it for some time because of statements that various parties have made. So why don't we have that covered off?
Through the chair, I'm happy to take that. That's a risk on any work that this council does that relies on direction coming from central government. So I didn't think that a risk like that was necessary, in the sense that it's a given in the situation we're in at the moment, given that we still ultimately have a piece of legislation through the MPS itself that's in force, and we're just trying to comply with that requirement. So I didn't think it was necessary to put a risk in particular about an incoming government where they would have the power to change possibly, you know, lots of things that we do or the way that we do things, not just the FTS.
Okay. The other question I've got just goes to the comments that you made, Jacques, about a structure plan or something, that there'd be some more detail, and you referenced Whenuapai in that context. So how are we budgeting for that work as it goes to, say, Whenuapai and other parts of the region, and how quickly is that going to be available, given that somebody could lodge a private plan change tomorrow?
The kind of planning that we, as I said earlier, exactly what that looks like, we don't know yet. We will figure that out with the local board, but it is not a structure plan. It would be something lower than a structure plan. In terms of the funding of that, we are aware of that planning and a commitment in the FDS if it goes through. And so in terms of the LTP and the budgets, certainly at a CPO level, we've been thinking about it. It is probably not something, we are not talking about millions, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands here either. It is probably something that we can absorb within our existing budget allocations. This is not going to be like a big massive plan change or structure plan exercise. It is something more simple than that. So we can probably absorb that within our budgets.
The other question I've got just goes to the future-proofing of this process, and in particular it goes to floodplain areas that, using the terminology, have got downstream flood constraints. And my concern, and I continue to raise this, is there are many areas where it'll be impossible for the stormwater to escape if you've got a severe flood event, storm surge and the like. And we know that. And that situation is aggravating all the time because the forecasts are getting progressively worse in terms of the breakup of the ice sheets and so on. So are you factoring this in terms of the capacity of these circumstances to change? For example, we've made changes as a consequence of the flood events that we've had recently. So what's the capacity to change this?
I think that's a key aspect of those areas that we've red flagged. There are requirements in terms of stormwater planning in a number of different documents. Those are existing requirements, and that's kind of what the red flag areas highlight. In case people weren't aware of this, you need to be aware that there are some stringent requirements in terms of stormwater planning. Another aspect of the red flags is we really need to test scenarios in these areas, and a number of different scenarios, because as you say, things are not necessarily going to get better, they are most likely going to get worse. And so that's the whole point about the red flagging these areas, is that there needs to be scenario testing for that whole kind of area, for the kind of integrated catchment planning, and what those what that looks like under different scenarios. And so that's kind of the whole point of the red flagging, to give that a very clear message on that.
So the question I've got that goes to this is, we've had a recent flood event where there have been houses in areas that have flooded, and either we or the government has allowed that development, and the consequences that we're up for millions, billions of dollars. In this process, we are saying that it's appropriate to develop in some areas at this point in time. And on my part, I believe some of those areas are going to be subject to flooding in the future and future buyouts. And I have a very real concern about this council being on the hook for that. I'm referring to locations in Drury, for example, where the whole area is joined in terms of the stream network. You really can't separate one location from another, and it's all got downstream flood constraints. And there are other areas around Auckland that I could also point out. So my question is, how are we able to cover that eventuality? So what do we need to do legally to cover ourselves? Because I've got a real concern around this, and particularly because the amount of development we're talking about and its capital value is huge.
I'm going to leave the legal aspect probably to somebody else, given that's not my forte. But in terms of what the FDS tries to do, and that's really also what Councillor Newman was speaking to, the FDS tries to, in those areas that have significant hazards, so in this case within the floodplains, even though there might have been decisions in the past in other areas to allow development in these areas like that, the FDS tries to not do more of that. Let's not, even though things might have been done in the past, let's not keep on doing that into the future. And so that's kind of the approach that the FDS takes on that. In terms of, and of course there are processes to go through to get to that point, unitary plan processes, but in terms of the legal question, that's probably not for me to respond to.
I think also, Councillor Walker, part of this is doing exactly what you're saying. We are pulling back, which has been seen as controversial, we are pulling back where we development in floodplains more than I think maybe ever before. The other thing in current brownfield areas is that hazard plan change that we've been working on, which will come to us. But as Phil Reid and others have explained a number of times, it is almost impossible to prohibit, but we are working on plan changes that will limit development in those areas. But under the current rules, this is a big step forward into limiting that, this FDS. If this FDS doesn't pass today, there is far more land in floodplains now than there will be if it passes.
So the kind of supplementary question I've got that goes to this, and I've raised this before, the huge problem we have in respect of development is the modern style of development where there's a concrete pad that's at ground level. If there's any change, it's subject to flooding. Whereas the old style of construction where you had piles meant you could lift a house. So are we giving any thought in this process to the type of development? Because the areas that are next to the floodplains, these hazard areas, are going to be the hazard areas of the future, and we already know that. So how are we building in some resilience to this process?
Probably a few aspects to, in terms of an answer. Because of what the FDS is required to do, it simply can't get into the level of detail of, say, house construction, that kind of thing. Just not the role of the FDS. But the FDS does give direction to prevent future harm and liability, just as the Chair said. Also important to remember that in terms of flooding, the FDS doesn't just focus on greenfield areas, there's also a focus on flooding in brownfield areas, and so hence it has it identifies a number of priority areas for that adaptive planning. And so how those priorities were identified as a combination of the flooding hazard, but also population density, deprivation, so those communities that can almost least afford to manage the impacts of should an event like that happen, those areas have been identified, and as I said earlier, programs such as Making Space for Water and the Resilient Auckland program will give effect to that. And so there's a lot of work to flow out of that, and one would assume in due course that will also flow through into the Unity Plan, which may deal with issues such as you've just raised about kind of how we build houses and how resilient that might be in the future.
And the other question I've got just goes to the highly productive soils, and I note that there's a reference to the National Policy Statement on highly productive land. What I'm seeking assurance on is around the nature of the highly productive soils. So what we've got at Pukekohe, for example, is a circumstance where you've got phenomenal soil, but in addition to that, you've got access to water, you've got frost-free locations, and you've got proximity to market, and there are other things as well. And it's that combination that is unique. Are we covering that off adequately? It's not just the one thing, it's not just the productive nature of the soil, it's a combination of things. So are we covering that off? And if so, where is it? Where can you point me to? Thank you.
A key thing about the NPS is, of course, that it does protect those soils. What it essentially doesn't allow is development on those soils. Where this is mentioned in the FDS is particularly in the rural section. There are references to the NPS highly HPL in there. There's also an action in the rural section, and then of course in the implementation section, about a rural strategy, prioritizing the southern rural area for us to start work over there. And the intention behind that rural strategy is to think about all of the interests in the southern rural area. There clearly is development there, but there clearly is also where a lot of Auckland and New Zealand's food is grown. And so the intention behind that strategy is to comprehensively look at how that whole southern rural area functions, where additional growth would be appropriate, how that plays out in terms of food production and protecting that industry.
So I understand the intention. I'm just looking for specifically where is a mention of the factors that I'm putting forward. Where can you point to? Because if we are subject to some legal challenge and the like, we need to be able to hang our hat on these things. Because I don't see it in this document. Maybe I've missed it.
No, Councillor, Appendix 1 and 2 shows the, maps the constraints, which includes the figure 13, it includes the Lux soils.
I understand the maps. I'm talking about the words, so that we're identifying not just the soil, but the frost-free nature, the access to water, the access to markets. So we're covering ourselves. If we don't have it, can we add it? I'm sure we can add that. Those are all factual statements. We know that about the Pukekohe area, so we're happy to add those other conditions that add to the... Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
Do I need to move an amendment around this, Mr. Chair?
No, you don't. I mean, I guess,
We got it?
yeah, personally, but it would have been nice for all the work we've done on this and the 6 workshops and to have these kind of specific details brought up at any time.
And yes, I did raise these issues consistently at every point where I've had an opportunity, and that's on the record. Thank you.
Okay. It is slightly separate to it, but we will add it where we will add a final drafting, myself, Angela, and a member of the IMSB to add those additional words. So if we,
Oh, you've already gone up under D.
oh yeah, we will do that under D and make
Councillor
sure. I've already discussed this with Councillor Baker as well. Who's brought it to us.
But Chair, that's not an issue. It's just an additional line or two, just explaining that there's more to that it's more than just the soils. It's easily done.
Councillor Sayers, we've got 3 more questions and we're going to move to debate. I'm sorry, I'll close off questions now. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got 3 questions, but I might just start off with my third one first, just to follow on and kind of almost segue in from what you've just been talking about, so it might make it a bit easier for you, Jacques. And it's just getting the voice of the Rodney Local Board tabled. So, and I'll just they passed a resolution in September. I'll just read it out to just refresh you. It's just, and it just touches on what you've been talking about. I just want to understand clearly for them what might have changed between September and now, and their concerns are covered. So they just resolved that they do not support the proposed changes to the National Policy Statement on highly productive land, and that would provide for consenting process for new infrastructure and intensive indoor primary production and hydroponic greenhouses on highly productive land. And this would undermine the purpose of this National Policy Statement and could lead to significant loss of highly productive land in Auckland. And they had a B to the total resolution. And B just reads, request that central government reconsider rezoning highly productive land in the future urban and countryside living areas of Auckland back to rural production. So since then to now, Jacques, is there any further comment you might like to add in terms of giving them confidence around their concerns?
I think it is included in this, but also under item 10, we're writing our submission on that and support the as far as I remember, we support the direction you're saying. So our submission on that MPS comes under item 10, so that will be incorporated. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
thanks.
So we'll discuss those quite specific things under that MPS and our feedback on that, because we are asking for those changes to the government, and I guess the government of the day will pick it up as well, our submission on that.
Okay. Do you want to leave it at that now, Richard?
Just
Okay.
double check with Megan that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Megan. The second question was just around comfort around from the legal aspects in terms of these murmurings of a potential judicial review, Mr. Chair, and that's, and they haven't, obviously it's dependent on today's decisions if anyone wants to move forward with that or not, so it's a little bit hypothetical, so I understand a judicial review would consider the process we undertook, what information we considered and what information we didn't consider. So can you make any general comment at all around how that would work if a judicial review was submitted to the council?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Councillor Sayers. So the legal avenue opened, so assuming you approve this today, there is legal avenue for submitters to take a judicial review, which is a challenge on process only to the High Court, so not on the content, but on the process by which we've done the work. If you're asking if there's a risk of that, we know that there has been some threat of that, but as I'm unaware of any actual legal challenge being made. Should that occur, then we will need to give you advice then, because I think you kind of mentioned it, Councillor Sayers, unclear as to what that could be, how far it went, and possibly what the decision is today as well. It obviously could well change from the recommendations that we had earlier. So I can't go much further than that, but there's no legal reason that you can't make a decision today, if that's also what you're asking.
That's helpful. Thank you, Megan. And my final question was around plan changes that have already, plan changes that might be in progress. And does the stage of where those plan changes are at, are they in any way potentially impacted by today's decision? In other words, say somebody put in a plan change yesterday compared to somebody who has had a plan change that's at notification or has gone out for notification versus one that's at a hearing stage. Does that make any difference in terms of the impact of today's decisions? So I guess I'm just asking a general question, first of all, about how does this impact existing plan changes? And then is that in any way influenced about where they are in the process?
Through the chair, so no, this decision doesn't change the process by that, whether something was lodged yesterday or tomorrow or is, through notification, the process still remains. So it will flow through into a hearing process in front of independent hearing commissioners, and they will make their decision to either approve or decline that plan change. So there's no change at all to that process. Just like the current development strategy, if this was approved today, this FDS could be given regard to as the kind of legal, or had regard to is the legal phrase, as part of that plan change. But that's a decision for the independent hearings commissioners. We can't comment on that. But in terms of process, it doesn't affect the process at all.
I suppose I'm particularly interested in perhaps the last part of that, your answer there. So it's up to the commissioners to decide if they consider it and the level of consideration they give to it?
Correct, that's right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Leone. All good. Last question, we've got Councillor Turner. Okay. Right, I think we just have one question from Councillor Darby on a procedural. If you just want to put up, please, Sandra, the amendments, those additional ones. So myself and Councillor Dalton are comfortable with the additions. They are mostly processed to sort of point out F and G are around, some of the councillors say is question around processes. This doesn't preclude or stop future plan changes. It doesn't obviously change the ability for people to do that. That's just the law. And to give people comfort that that's what that means. There's also earlier up in A, in a discussion with Councillor Baker. So F and G worked with the Independent Māori Statutory Board. They wanted some clarity around that and others as well. A is around discussion there, if you read that, on the rural strategy and around what potential future increase of dwellings around current rural settlements. So this is not about, new areas. This is about what that looks like, how that will work through the rural strategy. That was already assumed to be part of the next steps, but we just wanted to put it in there. Was there anything more you wanted to question Jacques about that, Councillor?
Yeah, look, generally I agree with these additional recommendations. I'm just always, given the history on this FDS, we've gone a long way. I really would like Jacques and the team to comment on the further recommendations, which are not the staff recommendations, are the political recommendations. I think they're pretty innocuous, but particularly on, Jacques, on the A, that proposed rural strategy, that's a yet to come strategy. I just don't want to see us in a situation where we're compromising the intent of the FDS by a yet to be determined strategy. Are there any risks in that AI, please?
Councillor Darby, from my perspective, no. I think both aspects of that statement is factually correct. If the FDS is adopted today, then we will need to do that rural strategy. I think that is a really good thing. The point that Councillor Lee raised earlier, the NPS isn't really about rural areas, but we think that work needs to be done, and because there would be considerable change probably over the future in the southern area and the northern area, it is really worthwhile doing a proper job of looking how that area functions. So the second part of that statement, I mean, that is the case, that is factual. There's nothing strange about that, so I'm quite comfortable with
okay, thank you. Good to go.
Mr. Chairman, I have also put an amendment forward up to the table. It's signed and seconded.
Yes, I was just going to thank the staff and let them move away, and then your amendment will be the first debating point
Okay.
of the meeting. Thank you very much, staff. This is a phenomenal amount of work. I do not know how you've done this significant amount of back and forth trying to get many of us and submitters the right information. I know that not everyone will be happy with every part, but I think you have tried your best to get good factual information and changes that are fair, but do respond to the overall feedback, but also what we requested as a committee to be the strategic directions for this. So you have honoured what we asked you to do, and the you know, the submitters when you look at the support there. So thank you once again, and we will go into debate now. So thanks. Thank you so much. So what we will do now, and I think it's probably the only safe way for our puku to do it, is we will debate Councillor Williamson's amendment, which is an amendment by replacement, I think, first, and then we will go to lunch and debate the full item. I think that would be the best way for, especially for staff. So Councillor Williamson, you'll have a chance to speak to your amendment now, then we can all debate that. But I will, anyway, yes. Thank you.
Look, thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's an amendment by way of addition, I think, isn't it, rather than...
I think it'll be replacement because we won't be able to pass everything else.
Okay. All right. Look, it's pretty simplistic, and I don't think it needs a lot of explanation other than to say this. I just think that if the officials were right here, and it's not terribly contrary to what the incoming government believes is the way to go, then I can see nothing wrong with having a chat with whoever the new ministers are when they're sworn in, getting reasonable agreement about where we go forward and taking it from there. I don't believe we should be directed by any government, whoever they are, either the sitting government or a new one. We should make decisions our own selves, but we should also be aware of what it is that they are seeking to do and then decide. So this amendment is just to give us a delay pending discussions with an incoming government. That's all. And if there's cordial discussions that agree that it's fine to proceed, then no problem for me. I'm actually quite happy with some of the stuff that's in this. I'm not opposing it. I just think that at a timing when there's 24 hours, we will know of the numbers of who's in and out of their seats, and that's the reason for the amendment.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Are there other speakers to this? Councillor Turner and then Mayor.
Thank you. This is a surprise to me. I will support this because if this doesn't go through, I'm not supporting the whole thing anyway. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, Mayor Wayne Brown.
I was going to speak to say that I'm basically in support of the underlying thing that we had before this amendment came up. I need to remind people, as far as delaying go, I'm totally opposed to this. 180,000 people voted for me to kick Wellington influence away. The delay supporters are inviting Wellington to think that they have the right to tell Auckland what to do. We must decide this and make them change it if they dare. Aucklanders have had enough of Wellington telling us what to do. To delay is to run up the white flag to Parliament. Look how unpopular the 3x3 housing rule is. Even National backed away from their original support. I mean, I can't think of anything that is more at odds with what I stand for than saying we need to wait for Wellington to tell us what to do before we can set out a sensible future growth plan. I've been consistent with both sides. We took aggressive action with the outgoing government. Mrs. Megan Woods had to eat some meal of humble pie when she said that we were looking to take over the planning of our city. We didn't wait to have a cup of tea with them. We said no unanimously and they backed down. And we don't wait for the incoming government to plan our city either. I'm going to sit down with the next minute to discuss our shared priorities and areas to work together, and I need to know the council position in that discussion first. Not to go into that discussion with a blank sheet of paper and a concession that we can't plan the region unless the government is happy. So I will be voting against this amendment strongly, and I urge my fellow councillors to be councillors. If you want to get in Parliament, stand for Parliament. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, look, happy to support the amendment, although I don't think it's going to pass. I mean, look, my view is the NPSUD is a national policy statement set down by the government, and it was always interesting to check in if there is a position that has changed. I guess we'll know in coming days. But Chair, if this fails, I would, and I won't speak again if I may, because actually the plan itself, I think, is very good. But for the one issue that I've previously discussed at length with Jacques, and we've discussed via email yesterday. So can I just express that, yes, I don't mind supporting the amendment. If it fails, it fails. If it does fail, I won't speak again. I'm happy to support the substance of the plan, but what I would like is for the secretarial note to note my opposition to the treatment of the floodplain in Takanini South, that my preference would be for the whole of that floodplain area to be red flagged, rather than splitting the area up with red flagging in the north and with with removal in the south. So if you could ask the secretary to note that in the event this amendment does fail, I won't speak again, but I would like to, notwithstanding my support for the border plan, just to note my view in relation to that Takanini catchment. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor, and yes, I've got a secretarial note prepared. I'll talk to Sandra about that. Thank you for that. Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. I don't really have much to add to what the Mayor said in terms of the underlying purpose, I think, of this amendment in regard to delay. There is, though, I think a little bit of unreality, that's not really a word, is it, about the timing impact here. Yes, we will know tomorrow the breakdown of the special votes, but we do not know how long after that negotiations will take to actually form a government. We do not know, and will not know for some time, even if we know how the numbers sit, what influence that's going to have on policy. We do not know and cannot know, again, probably for at least 6 months, what the legislative change might look like and what the prioritisation of that will be. A new government has a lot of things to get done, and this may not be high on the priority list. It may be, but it may not be. And so for us to leave a blank in this space in the meantime, I think would be really irresponsible. So I'm not supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Councillor Darby.
Yeah, boy, the Mayor's actually made it pretty clear that it's about time Auckland started leading in Auckland for Auckland. And let's respect our government of the time, but I'm not going to be caught in the timid category. I think we really do need to, at this point, after, coming up 3 hours, this is about $10,000 an hour to run these meetings. Look at the staff supporting our decision making. Look at the people around this circle. Everybody's getting paid here, and deferring an item at this time, I've not heard the previous notice of deferring this. I think it's actually timid to do that. Yes, we've had a change of government, but Auckland governs Auckland, and let's do that. It's not so long ago that Nicola Willis, now she's possibly a Deputy Prime Minister, and Megan Woods, Minister of Housing, they jointly stood up and said that the National Party and the Labor Party support the RMA, Enabling Housing Supply Act, and the NPSUD. We're dealing with the NPSUD part, FDS, Future Development Strategy. Both parties were abreast of that and supporting it and waving flags on it. The legislative roundabout is ruining Auckland, and not just Auckland, but other councils as well. So I'll just give you an idea of deferral. Deferral adds cost, right? I asked a question in June of our senior staff how much we'd spent on the RMA Enabling Supplies Act and the NPSUD, and the numbers came in. You'll be stunned. This is what legislation has cost Auckland. And I'm not saying the legislation is bad. I mean, I think this is good legislation under the NPSUD FDS. But the non-recoverable costs at June
internal costs were 3.6 million and external 3.9 million. $7.5 million responding to government statute. Now, we're going to just keep adding to that cost, or we're going to have some grit and not be timid and put this over the line. This has been well consulted on. Some 70% of Aucklanders support this direction. We have done this to death. There's no question that we've done our homework absolutely solidly. Let's get on with our responsibility as Auckland governors for Auckland.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, Chair. I just want to tautoko what's been said by Councillor Darby and the Mayor as well. And I just want to repeat something I've said recently. Let's not kick this can down the road as well. Kia ora. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, kia ora, Chair. Yeah, look, to be honest with you, I'm surprised that this is here, with the greatest of respect, because, you know, I think the Mayor is exactly right. I couldn't have put it better myself. We need to take charge of our own destiny on this kind of stuff. And, you know, I say this because I don't agree with the stances taken on housing a lot by our council. I always feel that they never go far enough. And you guys have heard that lecture 100 times from me, so I don't need to do it again. But, you know, I've always held to the fact that it's our democratic responsibility to make those decisions, even when me as one individual councillor doesn't agree with them. So to pass this is not just at odds with the Mayor's strongly held view that I completely agree with, but it's also completely flies in the face of councillors that decried government intervention in planning last term. This was a very common refrain when the MPSUD was going through and all that work last term about government should step out of the way and council's got the unitary plan and we should do it our own way. So to then kind of backflip on that, that's quite a weird situation for me. So I'm not really quite sure why you would support flipping around 180 in that situation. You know, the principle doesn't change, even if the colour of the government changes. You know, the principle is that we need to be taking charge of our own planning destiny. We don't need to call in mum and dad anymore, man. This is our decision to make. So let's just bloody well make it, eh? I just also add my view that, you know, we've had 6 workshops on this, right? It's extremely well consulted. It's been thrashed out. We've had a lot of questions today, like maybe 10 times more than we had in the workshops themselves, which is quite an interesting point. But we've really thrashed this one out, eh? So, and finally, look, there's one other thing I'd say. We actually asked this question directly to Jacques, and staff was very clear. They said, look, a month is not going to make a huge amount of difference. You're talking about legislative change that can really drag through. Can take many months, could take a year, it could take more, you know. So I just don't really know what this accomplishes. So, you know, with the greatest of respect, I'll be opposing this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina and then Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, I want to acknowledge the staff. But speaking to the amendment, I will not be supporting it. It seems like a wee bit deja vu around, as Councillor Foley said, kicking the can down the road. The Māori can was kicked down the road last Thursday. I'm not surprised that this amendment is up here to again kick another can down the road. I will not be supporting it, as I said. If those councillors who are going to support this recommendation, if they want to keep on kicking the can down the road, they should then put their name forward for the next soccer tournament. But, you know, from my perspective, I ended up putting my name forward and got elected over the years that I have been there to make a decision. That decision is to be made around the FDS. So, Jacques, I just want to say thank you for your reply with Councillor Williamson's question earlier about reading the policy documents of the 3 possibly parties that will form the government. I take your answer as gospel and support what you have said than what others have around that table. So, Chair, for me, will not be supporting this. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dalton, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add, look, 100% behind the Mayor, as I think a lot of people were before the election. We weren't going to get to Wellington to tell us what to do then, but the government's changed, so perhaps we're going to check in with Wellington a bit more often. In fact, this did happen last week in regard to the vote of Māori seats, and I was at an AGM on Sunday where a councillor said they were behind the Mayor's decision, well, it wasn't the Mayor's decision, but they were behind deferring the decision on Māori seats because we have a change of government and we need to check in. And I thought, well, for one, that's a lie, because other councils are getting Māori seats in, but why? We've decided that we are going to lead Auckland by Auckland, Aucklanders and Auckland decision makers. So this heading back down to Wellington is just completely contradicts what the Mayor has asked us to support him to do for Auckland. So I won't be supporting this.
Kia ora, Councillor. Councillor Lee. Thank you.
My instinct is to support this tough talk coming from the Mayor. You know, let's tell the government, wherever it is, where to get off. However, Councillor Williamson's amendment is merely courtesy and diplomacy of an incoming government helping build a relationship with an incoming government. It doesn't mean anything's going to be changed at all. It's just a question of courtesy. I do, when it comes to tough talk, I didn't see much of it when it came to the $1 billion blowout of the City Rail link and us having to cough up $500 million from Auckland ratepayers on the demand of the 51% government-owned CRL Limited. Nor did I see much tough talk about the ill-starred light rail project. All I saw was the council trying to drive the square light rail project into a round hole, which obviously didn't work. And we won't talk about Three Waters. The intent here is courtesy and diplomacy. I would think it would be better directed at the secret provisions we're going to discuss soon on the detested National Policy Statement of Urban Development and Plan Change 78. But we'll wait and see whether we're going to have tough talk on that one as well. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Member Ashby.
Kia ora. Yeah, look, I support the Mayor's comments. I also just I'm just interested in the consistency here. So we had a vote last week on a basis of a tyranny of majority. But this time we've got 80% in favour of this, but the rules aren't the same this time. So it seems interesting to me, the lack of consistency in terms of the topic of the day. So we're not going to be voting, well, I'm not going to be voting for this. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Member Ashby. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the amendment. And the reason I'm doing so is that I believe that to do with planning, there's a lot of trust that has been lost over the last few years in planning. I think there's confusion by the public. And while I acknowledge all the good work and the submissions and everything else that has come to this, I ask why the haste? If it is a matter that has been properly considered, and by the time the government, whatever composition it might be, come to grips with what the cost of infrastructure is going to be, which is something that we've never been able to get traction on, I don't see why we can't use one of our Wednesday workshops to reconvene this meeting and actually have this passed on. I do believe that trust has been broken, and I'm not going to be accused of kicking the can down the road. That was the accusation to me when I put up any resistance to Plan Change 78. And I was belittled and pilloried, actually, for that. And then it was interesting to me after the floods, when we had a matter that I raised as extraordinary business in the governing body, that it was voted on unanimously, which is something as chair you want to remind us from time to time. I don't particularly care about your interpretation or the officer's interpretation of what political parties' policies might be. I want to see them for myself. I do trust that the Mayor can be a skillful negotiator once we see the government, but right at the moment, in the interests of getting it right and not squandering any more money on chasing up on things that may potentially change, I just don't see what the indecent haste for this is. I do not accept the advice that I've been given that it must be voted on today, and I will be supporting the amendment, and I encourage others to do so.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you. Last speaker before I finish up, Member Henare.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I'm totally supportive of what the Mayor has said. And here's the thing. A lot of people today have said that we should wait until a new government is formed. Well, why didn't the new government that may be formed after Friday come and see us and saying, this is what we're going to do, and we want your support? Why is it the diplomatic and fun thing to do is to wait for them to form? And here's the question. With the proposed, and I don't even know what the proposed changes are, because I heard the comments on Radio New Zealand this morning that there was going to be change, but what change is coming is anybody's guess. So how is the biggest city in the country supposed to operate on the basis of a report on Radio New Zealand that the government or the incoming government may or may not change the law, the RMA, by Christmas? That's tomfoolery. And as my colleague Ed has said, and also Councillor Filipaina, the interesting thing about last week's vote on the Māori seats was we had to sit here and listen to people say the submissions were 68% in favour of a no vote, while today we've got a 70% figure on the submissions in favour of the FDS. So time now is to put up or shut up, because I'm sick and tired of the puritanical way some of these councils stand up on the fence line and beat their chests about democracy and beat their chests about listening to the submitters. We're not less than a week later, not one of them is standing up and saying, well, actually, we should listen to what the submitters say. I vote no, and I will continue to vote no against all those 11 councillors who did a disservice to the city last week. Blah, blah, blah.
Kia ora, Member, last speaker, Councillor Sayers, and then I'll...
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hill. I think it's important that everyone around the table retains an open mind when they enter the room about how they will vote. But look, we do need to listen to submitters, and I'm very happy to vote for the substantive, if that's the right word for it, and prepared to do so if this is lost. However, I do see some wisdom as a governor in terms of the arguments that have been put up around the table just recently, Mr. Chair, particularly the one from Councillor Lee and the one from Councillor Fletcher, in terms of, and the other members have spoken as well. It's quite right, we don't know what the government's plans are, we haven't seen them, yet we're making a decision around Auckland's planning for many, many future years that is highly significant. So, putting on a governor's hat, the way that I'm feeling about this is, what's the harm in understanding better if there's going to be some substantive change that might alter the way we might be thinking today compared to what we might discover under the new government. Is there not some wisdom in terms of, I guess the question is, what if? I don't want to turn around and we pass something and perhaps we then suddenly say, well, I wish we hadn't done that because something new came to light, Chair. So I'm not adverse to supporting what's been proposed up there, but should it fail, I am supportive of the substantive.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Councillor Sayers. And I'll just round up. I guess thank you to everyone for the passion behind what they're saying on all sides of this discussion. I think, we do, in my opinion, in this case, need to listen to the Mayor. He wants to take forward our plan. As said in the manifesto, our decisions, our values, our direction, if we don't pass anything, he cannot do that. He cannot bring something to the table to say, this is what my council believes in. We do not know the timing it may take to create the government, but also have incoming ministers be briefed, and then the discussion around policy development, which Nicola Willis and Megan Woods said on the podium when they supported the NPSUD that the main reason was the bipartisanship was to make sure councils had certainty and there wasn't this back and forth over and over and over. We have had big support from our community already on this, but if they were to change the NPSUD, which as far as my read of their policies, they're supportive of the NPSUD, they want to give us maybe potential to opt out of the MDRS, but the NPSUD in its totality, and as Jacques pointed out around the capacity, all fits within that. That would take 6 months to a year, maybe. The last NPSUD to roll out took 3 years. First, you have to consult with mana whenua, then you have to consult with stakeholders, then you have to consult with local government, then you have to put it out widely, then you have to bring forward those decisions. We helped prepare the last NPSUD. We put in meeting after meeting. I remember, much like this, we had workshop after workshop adding our thoughts of what that NPSUD would look like. That takes time. And then to change anything in the RMA would be years. I've spoken to MFE officials who said any change will be years in the making. And that's fine. We will work with whatever is given to us. But if I don't know what would happen from now if it was just about a conversation post this meeting. How long does that go on? If the Mayor and others don't have time to meet with whoever the new minister might be, we will not be able to put this on the agenda for the December meeting, then it's the February meeting, then the whole purpose of this we legally have to have in play for the long-term plan around what we need and where we're investing. And infrastructure providers the long list of infrastructure providers who support this need to know where we are going as well. So for me, I think we have to press on. I won't be supporting the amendment because it isn't a rush. We've taken this through. We've delayed it to ensure we had double the consultation time, pulled it off the last agenda to ensure everyone had the advice and the extra workshops and the extra information, and we gave the track change document, which I don't think we've ever done before, twice to all members of the committee for 6 weeks for everyone to come back, ask questions. Tried, and I've taken on anyone who's asked. I've taken on anyone's feedback and tried to get that into the document. So I think it is disappointing if we suddenly, after all that delay now. So here we've got a division called.
Do I get a right of reply?
Not an amendment, sorry, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. A division has been called on the amendment, which is on your screen. Chair holds
no to the amendment.
IMSB member Ashby.
No.
Councillor Baker.
No.
Councillor Bartley.
No.
Mayor Brown.
No.
Deputy Chair Dalton.
No.
Councillor Darby.
No.
Councillor Ferry.
Against.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Fully.
Against.
IMSB member Henare.
No.
Councillor Henderson.
No.
Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Leone,
Against.
Councillor Newman,
Yes.
Councillor Sayers,
I can see it's lost, but for.
Councillor Stewart,
For.
Councillor Turner,
I'm going to abstain.
Councillor Walker,
Yes.
Councillor Watson, Councillor Williamson,
In favour.
Point of order, Chair. Sorry, I should have said yes to that.
Oh, I think you did. Oh, yeah, you did. Sorry, Councillor Newman.
yes, he did say yes.
Yep. So that was lost. 4 was 7 against 14 and 1 abstention. We will now. Thank you very much, everyone. We will move to We will go have half an hour for lunch. So we'll come back at 32 minutes away. We'll come back at 1:45, and then we will debate the rest of the item. Kia ora, thank you.